Hi. To those of you who are familiar with this channel and the content thereof, welcome back. To those of you who are new, welcome to this informal Bible study. Today we're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 20 in verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from thence toward the south country, and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night, and said to him, Behold, thou art a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, Lord, wilt thou slay also a righteous nation? Said he not unto me, She is my sister? And she, even she herself, said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands have I done this. And God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thy heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, knowing thou that thou shalt surely die. Know thou that thou shalt surely die, thou and all that are thine. Therefore Abimelech rose early in the morning, and called all his servants, and told all these things in their ears, and the men were sore afraid. See that right there? Just the natural fear of God that we all ought to have, but especially those of us who are familiar with God. Now, Abraham shows a fear of men that temporarily overshadows his faith in God, or fear of God. These two things often compete for our motivations, that is, to be the driving force behind our actions. God shows mercy to Abimelech in that he doesn't slay him, but merely prevents him from sinning in ignorance. God's mercy often takes a form of restraint, preventing the damage that we can do to ourselves and others by acting according to our unrestrained desires. God is also making certain that Isaac is born to Abraham and Sarah in spite of Abraham's recklessness with his wife. The future heir of God promises them, and his own integrity, omitting his marriage to Sarah. God gives Abimelech ample warning, received in a fear of the Lord, and shared with his people, showing a righteousness that produces obedience. And that's all to say that Abimelech's righteousness is clearly shown here. This isn't necessarily, another priestly king like Melchizedek by any means. But what we're seeing here is Abimelech kind of surprising the reader and Abraham with this perceived righteousness, this obedience toward God. But it also shows how powerful God is, to where he has restrained him from sinning. And, a lot of times God's mercy comes in the form of restraint, keeping us from sinning as badly as we'd like to, or as badly as we intend to. So all of this being said, God shows his mercy through restraint in this kind of, let's just call it an account, in this account of Abimelech and Sarah. And Abraham, however, the one who is considered righteous in so many other ways, is showing a real unrighteousness. And that just goes to show you that God's people are not perfect, right? It goes to show you that just because you are called doesn't mean you are flawless. All of that being said, we can't go around pretending as though Abraham was perfect. And we also can't go around pretending that everything described in the Bible is prescribed in the Bible. meaning we can't pretend as though everything that the Bible mentions is something that we should just go ahead and do. People use this in arguments toward polygamy and all sorts of horrible things. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to verse 9. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, What hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, Because I thought, Surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. And yet indeed she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, This is thy kindness which thou shalt show unto me. At every place whither we shall come, say of me, He is my brother. And Abimelech took sheep and oxen and men servants and women servants, and gave them unto Abraham, and restored him Sarah his wife. And Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before thee. Dwell where it pleaseth thee. And unto Sarah he said, Behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes, unto all that are with thee, and with all other. Thus she was reproved. So Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bare children. For the Lord had fast closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So we see in Abimelech a righteousness that Abraham did not expect, presumably out of ignorance to the fact that God can operate however he chooses, reveal himself to whoever he chooses. We don't know Abimelech's life story or background, but Abraham put his trust in his ability to manipulate others for his gain, and he receives a formal rebuke and backpedals to the fact that him and Sarah are half-siblings, which was a common thing in that day and age. You could share a father but not a mother. I don't recommend it, but that's how they did things. He made his lie a half-truth, which is still a lie, that has put Abimelech and his people in a seemingly dangerous position, one from which God rescues him. As God has warned Abimelech, he also tells him that Abraham is a prophet whose petitions can save his house. This kindness of the Lord is presumably the reason Abimelech is so generous toward Abraham instead of being vengeful. In other words, he could have just run him out of the country, gave him back his wife, but then run him out of his country. Abimelech didn't owe Abraham any kind of kindness. That's just a fact of the matter. Abraham, instead of being vengeful, he's kind to Abraham instead of being vengeful. Abraham, presumably out of gratitude for the way God has moved in this situation, finally does something righteous in interceding for Abimelech in prayer. This situation just goes to show that we all fall in a way that is usually very unflattering. You shouldn't be proud of your sins, but at the same time, you should be encouraged. You should be encouraged to do the right thing after you've sinned. You shouldn't, stumble and then think to yourself, well, I'm just going to sit in the mess that I've created. No, what you're going to do as a child of God is move forward from there. You pray for the person that you wronged, even though you wronged them. And you offer this prayer out loud so that they realize that just because a person wronged me doesn't mean that they don't care. Just because somebody has behaved in an unrighteous manner does not mean that they can't be restored. So God has restorative power, and to deny that is yet another act of unbelief. Yeah, that's something that Abraham didn't fall into after all this was said and done, but, he did try to justify his sin, and we often do that. So before we judge too harshly someone like Abraham, we need to understand that given the same situation, we might not have done that exact same thing, but we might have done something equally dishonest out of fear of, a foreign king, or, out of fear of new people that can make your life a lot harder for other reasons. There are people who hide their faith when they, get a new job so that they don't appear to be some kind of a kook. Just little things like that. We don't play with the same stakes that people did in the ancient world, and yet we still show unbelief. So, I'm not saying see yourself in all of the biblical stories. No, 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 no. What I'm telling you is these biblical accounts show the human condition, a condition with which I am plagued, a condition with which you are plagued. Nobody here is sinless. Nobody who's listening to this video is sinless. Nobody who's reading this Bible is sinless. All right. So all of that being said, have a little understanding when you read these things. Yes, there are some horrible, immoral things going on here, but I can guarantee you there are some horrible, immoral things that are going on in your life, in your mind. I've heard it said, God should have killed me in my sleep for the things that I've thought, said, and done. So that being said, this positive, uplifting message, let's go ahead and move on to chapter 21, verse 1. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived, and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all will hear me laugh. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. Now, what we see is a miraculous conception, not immaculate. There is only one immaculate conception, and that is of Jesus Christ. But Sarah's conception at the appointed time shows that God is under no obligation to operate on our timeline or within the limits of our understanding. Abraham naming and circumcising Isaac according to the commandment of the Lord simply shows a covenantal obedience, which is just to say the least. Sarah seems to be celebrating the birth of Isaac while admitting to her laughter from the earlier account of God's visit, also seemingly admitting the miraculous nature of the event, almost as though she still can't believe that this has happened. This miraculous birth also foreshadows Christ, as both were miraculously conceived, specifically promised fulfillments of God's word in the fullness of time. A little bit of that was pulled from a commentary by David Guzik. I can't necessarily endorse literally everything the man says, but he has some good observations. Alright, so moving on to verse 8. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had born unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she had said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Uh, you know, Isaac was celebrated as Abraham's true heir, which is predictably met with opposition from Abraham's eldest son. This vexes and concerns Sarah insomuch as she insists that Abraham casts out Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham, being concerned for his son, doesn't have the sound objective mind to make this decision easily, but God confirms this idea and its validity, understanding what manner of man Ishmael is to become. This also protects the inheritance of the son of promise. God then lays to rest any paternal concern for Ishmael's survival, declaring to Abraham that a nation will be made of Ishmael. We see that Abraham is concerned for Ishmael's safety here. But, if God says you're going to be a nation, that means you're going to survive some time in the wilderness. And so, you can't be a nation if you're dead. So obviously God is aware of what goes on in our minds, and he gives Abraham a little bit of peace with this decision, because it is a hard one. To banish your second wife, which you shouldn't have had, and the child you have together, to pretend that we wouldn't be conflicted by a situation like this is to be dishonest. So that being said, God settles the conflict almost immediately. Now moving on to verse 14. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed, and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice, and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew, and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. So, what we're seeing here is, Abraham sending Hagar and Ishmael early in the morning shows a prompt obedience to the Lord, despite his reservations. And God has put a lot of this to rest. He sends them with some resources, showing a measure of compassion, but still leaves plenty of room for divine providence, whether intentionally or unwittingly. Hagar has no plan, wandering in the wilderness almost as to say that she's given up. She's returned to Abraham and Sarah out of obedience to God, going back to chapter 16, verses 9 through 16, only to be cast out. So this wandering seems to show a helplessness. Hagar and Ishmael running out of water with no apparent source of water would seemingly confirm this hopelessness. And as she prepares psychologically, emotionally, for the death of her son, Hagar is reminded of the faithfulness of God in spite of perceivable circumstances. God makes apparent the resources and reminds her of the promise to make Ishmael a great nation, as if to reassure her that they were going to survive and thrive according to his plans. God's mercy shown to Ishmael and Hagar shows the love of God for them and his divine prerogative to use whom he will for his purposes. And we can also add here that while Hagar does show a certain obedience, we don't really hear a whole lot about Ishmael obeying and or worshiping God. And so all we know about Ishmael is that he survived this and becomes a great nation, and his, we know a little bit about his genealogy, but we don't know about his faith. Now, one could make the assumption that he has a great faith, but it's not really explicitly said here. God does not depend on who you're going to turn out to be when he blesses you. Some people are blessed and raised up as a reproach unto God's more complacent people. And Ishmael has descendants that are out of, around Egypt, the Ishmaelites who sell Joseph to Egyptians. These things happen to further the messianic line. So what we're seeing here is that Ishmael takes part in redemptive history, but we don't know that he's necessarily someone that would really hold God's favor based upon his faith. So what we need to understand is your merit is not what God's looking for. In fact, he might even bless some heathens just to keep his plan going in a way that you wouldn't understand. You will not always understand God's plan. Hagar didn't understand when she was out in the wilderness, even though she obeyed God. You can obey God, and things might not go in a way that you understand, but he's still going to work things out for those who are called according to his purposes. And in fact, if you skip on over to Romans, you'll read up on that. All right, so moving on before I get into too long of a tangent. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son. But according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water, which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. In other words, it's the first I'm hearing about it, man. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves, and Abimelech said unto Abraham, Thou hast set. What mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? Not a great orator over here, so please excuse me. And he said, For these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called the place Beersheba, which because they were swear both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech rose up, and Phicol the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So we see God's blessing in spite of the situation that Abraham was in. We don't have a whole lot of record about this taking of the well by Abimelech's servants, but what we do see here is the boldness and integrity that is produced in Abraham. And, not everybody's going to speak to a king in such a manner. But, you know, not everybody who enters a new country is going to even deal directly with the king. So we see a lot of God's favor put on Abraham and how he gets to deal with these people. And, the way he uses these opportunities don't always reflect a perfect faith. They don't always reflect a perfect, sinless lifestyle. I will say that you don't have to be sinless to be used by God. Otherwise, Jesus would be the only one ever having been used by God. And the only reason God preserves Abraham, it's not because of who Abraham is. It's not because of what Abraham's done. Those things are done out of a faith that produces this obedience. And this faith only exists because God keeps showing his faithfulness. And so Abraham has almost no option but that. He sees God's faithfulness and, sometimes lives his life based on that. So that being said, it's not about morals, although morals are there. It's not about behavior modification. That's not what the Bible's about. That's not what the gospel's about. The Bible and the gospel are about our sinfulness, God's faithfulness, and God's absolute sovereignty over it all. Not to say that he micromanages our decisions. That's not what I'm getting at here. I'm not talking about fatalism. But what I am talking about is that no matter what decision we make and how wrong that decision is, God always has the authority to step into that situation and make our horrible decisions turn out for the good. Even if it's not for our good, it's going to be for the good of somebody that the Lord has called. We're not going to see right away every good thing. Abraham didn't see right away how this was going to turn out to be an opportunity to make a covenant and show faithfulness and integrity. All he saw was people's servants taking violently his well. And a well in this point in time was, that was your source of water. They couldn't just hook up to a sink and get all the water they needed. This is how people sustain themselves. This is the Near East, where it's pretty warm out. So all of that being said, God's faithfulness is always going to be greater than our faith, because God's faithfulness is what produces that faith in us when we see it. That whole seeing is believing. We see God's faithfulness. We see God's faithfulness when he works in our lives. We see God's faithfulness when we read this Bible and see how he has operated in the past, how he's stepped into history to change it, to create a redemptive history. Redemptive history started in eternity past, but we see redemptive history interact with human beings from when Adam and Eve are told, and the serpent is told that there is going to be a seed that is going to crush the head of the serpent. And moving forward, we see all these ups and downs of human history, but we see God working through it all. God will work through all of this. Now, that being said, I wouldn't say the end result, but the end redemptive result is going to be that Jesus Christ is born. He is 1/3 of the Godhead, co-eternal with God the Father and the Holy Spirit, the second person of what we call the Holy Trinity, 1/3 of the triune God, however you need to put that. Jesus Christ is the Word made flesh, and he is eternally existent, and he came to this earth through a virgin birth, a miraculous birth, and he came, lived a perfect and sinless life, lived the life that we should have lived, but we can't, and died the death that we should all die, but won't necessarily die, and purchased our salvation with his blood. And he, ascended to heaven after showing himself to his disciples, and he is going to come back for his. And you can only be his by faith. You cannot earn this through works. So if you have not placed your faith in Jesus Christ today, I encourage you to do so. He is faithful, he is true, and he is the only one that can possibly save you. And he is coming back. And he will either be back as your redeemer or your judge. And you do not want the latter. I'm not going to get into it right now, but if you take one glance at the book of Revelation, you realize Jesus Christ is not the one to be on the wrong side of. So by faith, accept this free gift of salvation today. And as always, I encourage you, repent and believe. God bless.